Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining this special webcast live from LinkedIn's UK offices here in London. My name is James Khan, and I'm joined today by a lineup of some of the country's key figures when it comes to British business for what should be a very interesting discussion today on one of the biggest issues facing employers today: how the generation of millennials, who now make up more than half of the UK workforce. It's a changing world of work and what this means for organisations trying to recruit them. If you'd like to join the debate, please tweet your questions to @hire on LinkedIn, handled with the hashtag #LIMillennials, or ask them via the WebEx chat tool, and we'll get some of our guests to answer your questions for you. Well, let's get into the debate very shortly, but firstly, I wanted to briefly hand over to Josh Graf, Country Manager for LinkedIn in the UK, for a special announcement that offers some interesting context for today's discussions. Josh.
Thank you, James. We're delighted to have everyone here today, and I'm happy to reveal the reason behind hosting today's webcast. I'm delighted to announce here that we've passed the 20 million member milestone at LinkedIn in the UK. This is a great milestone for our members, but it also represents 20 million potential candidates that UK companies now have access to. And there's some really interesting data points behind the numbers. We've added 11 million new members since 2012. UK members made 339 million new connections in 2015. Last year alone, 1.2 million UK members changed their employer on the platform. The biggest sectors represented are IT, construction, healthcare, and retail. The three most searched skills by UK recruiters in 2015 were sales, Java, and marketing. But particularly relevant for today is the fact that students and younger professionals are the fastest growing demographics on LinkedIn, and an audience that employers are telling us they're increasingly keen to engage. So we're looking forward to a great debate and discussion today around that topic specifically. James, back to you.
Thank you, Josh. Well, with 20 million followers, that just tells me I need to add a few more of your followers to mine. In order to get the panel discussion on the way, what I'd like to do is take this opportunity to introduce you to the panel. So let's kick off with Andy Hill.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andy Hill from the Sage Group, which is the UK's biggest software technology company, second biggest in Europe. And we recruit about 2,000 people across the globe a year. In the UK, for us, being this technology company and well known, it's critical for us to start to think about how we engage with people. We represent small businesses in what we do our business, and so we champion entrepreneurs. And many of the millennials we'll talk about may be considering career paths which are more self-directed. And so it's to connect with that is very, very important. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting debate today, James.
Fantastic. Welcome, Andy. Paul Drexler.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. I'm not a millennial. I am the president of the Confederation of British Industry, CBI. I'm also chairman of one of the oldest private companies in the UK, Bibiline Group. And I'm delighted also to be chair of Teach First, the education charity, which is the largest recruiter of university graduates in the UK. So I'm very interested in how to attract, recruit and retain millennials.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Let's move on to our lady panellist, Kathy Allison.
Hi, I'm Kathy. I'm head of HR at FitFlop. We are based in Putney here in London, but we also have a global presence in terms of our workforce, with offices in New York, in Berlin, Hong Kong, teams in Vietnam, China, and what we find is that recently we've seen an increase in the time to hire has been greater among our junior level managers. That comes second in terms of the length of time to hire, just after our executive management team. And we believe that the people who we need to attract to those roles are in fact millennials. So we've been doing a lot of work generally in the business around our values and our culture, knowing how important values and culture are to our business success generally, but also in particular to the millennial workforce. So really interested to be part of the debate today.
Excellent, and welcome to you, Kathy. And finally, Jürgen Sundberg, founder of Undercover Recruiter.
Yes, that would be me, and I'm the CEO of a digital marketing agency called Link Humans, but I think I'm here because I founded Undercover Recruiter, which is Europe's largest recruiting blog, which I started about 6 years ago. And I think I was an early adopter using LinkedIn as a recruiter many, many years ago, and that's really how I got into being a digital marketer. And I also have a small team of millennials working in my office, so I can speak from first-hand experience about what it's like to attract, recruit and retain them.
Fantastic. Well, let's get this debate on the road. Josh, let me kick off with you. What is a millennial?
So, according to a variety of different sources, a millennial is anybody who was born in the from 1980 to the early 2000s. Frustratingly, I'm only 3 months off of that, so I fall just off millennials. But that's the official terminology: 1980 to 2000.
Okay, and Kathy, how would we define this group?
I think it's really tricky, and I don't know whether I actually take issue with the definition of a whole group of people having a certain set of characteristics as it is. I think that lots of things that I've read out there will talk about millennials being more focused on values and culture and purpose and why we're here and what we're doing that for, rather than contracts, pay, job security. But I think it's quite tricky to apply that set of criteria to everybody. And my experience is that most people like to be treated as individuals and have their own things that are important to them, and then look for that to be fulfilled through their career, their aspirations. But I suppose there are certain trends in terms of a confidence around speaking up around what's important, asking questions. We find that our millennial candidates are probably more likely to say, this is what I need, how are you going to provide it, and being more confident in having those conversations.
Good insight, Kathy. Jürgen, what would you say were the stereotypes of this generation, and is that fair, do you think, to stereotype them?
It's never fair to stereotype, of course. However, I'd say some of the stereotypes will be that millennials are very purpose-driven. They are very, it's all about the reason why. Why should I do something? If they believe in an organisation, they'll do it. They're not necessarily money motivated. They really want, as Kathy says, they want their opinions to be heard. This is probably not a stereotype. They're very tech savvy, and that's because they're younger, and they are very mobile first type of people. So if you want to connect with them and interact with them, you're going to have to use technology and be in the places where they are.
Excellent. Andy, you mentioned earlier that you hired 2,000 people a year. From your perspective, what do millennials mean to your organisation? And as an idea, what percentage of the workforce do they represent?
Well, I think what do they mean to our organisation? It's the future of our organisation. I think we always constantly wrestle to stay ahead in terms of technology and also connect with the small businesses out there. 90% of all jobs filled around the world either fall into small or medium-sized businesses. So that connection is very important for us. And in terms of the percentage-wise, we're talking now 70+% of our people. If you think 1980s when people are born, that's the iPhone generation, it's the digital generation, it's the network generation. It really starts to make us think very differently about how we connect and what are the demands from our organisation to accommodate that. Because I've forgotten most of the skills that I had 10 years ago, and I've had to learn a whole host of these things. So, we have to really think now very differently of what it means for our organisation, how we engage. So there's a lot of things around, a huge percentage of our workforce in this space, and actually most of our customers now are in this space. So it's about a connection both within and outside the workplace with our customers as well for us, James.
Okay. And Paul, in your opinion, how do you think millennials are impacting business across the UK?
Well, and actually, I think two interesting aspects. But first of all, I think they're bringing a tremendous set of skills and perspectives that are quite different from previous generation, because they are digital fit, digital savvy. It's a natural way of working. So I think they're enabling companies to compete in an intensely competitive world. But at the same time, they're bringing, I think, to businesses, particularly more traditional businesses, a massive challenge, not in terms of recruitment, which I might come back to, but actually retention, because about 70% of all young people surveyed today expect to leave their employer by 2020. If you turn the clock back to the 1960s, I suspect the statistic would have been the other way around.
There's a gold watch in there somewhere.
Well, and a pension and all these wonderful. It's a very different perspective. In fact, I was sitting down with a couple of millennials at lunchtime. Just, between them, one had already had 6 jobs, and the other had 11 jobs, and they were both under 30. I mean, it's a dramatic.
And they were proud of it.
Oh, listen. So I think for companies, in terms of recruitment, we have to resonate with the values that young people have today, and again, from my experience attracting people in to teach in the most difficult schools in the UK, the millennials have a much stronger bias for making a positive difference in society. They care much more about the impact of what they do and the positive side of it. So attracting people is one thing. The real challenge is how are we going to retain people in a world where their mobility is dramatically higher than previous generations. So the task of leadership is dramatically different.
Tell me, in your opinion, what advice would you give businesses today in how to accommodate and get the best out of this new generation?
Well, that's a great question as well, because I'm struck by the fact that I think more than 2/3 of young people expect to work flexible hours. Less than 25% expect to work 9 to 5 or less. So the first thing we have to do is change our perspective on what a 40-hour week is or a working week is. We've really got to turn the way things used to be on its head in terms of the hours, in terms of accommodating people's thoughts about where they will work and how they will work. So I think depending on if you're a digital business that's grown up in this time, I think your challenges are very different to if you happen to be in the UK steel industry, where you've got some different considerations. So I think what we have to do is to understand values are very important. But interestingly, if you look over the past several decades, going pre-millennials, what's important to people is a great job, good training development, good career opportunities. A lot of the things are the same. It's just, I think, the competitive intensity has probably increased.
Excellent, thank you for that. Josh, can you give us an example of maybe a millennial that works at LinkedIn? And what is it that you've learned from that experience of the impact that they're making?
So at LinkedIn, over just under 70% of our workforce, 69% are millennials. And therefore, they are the driving force of our business. They were the driving force of our business 5-10 years ago, and they're the driving force of our business today. And to Paul's point, we've had to make a series of changes internally to accommodate millennials as they're coming into our business. And so I remember looking back a couple of years ago when we were looking at benefits within the organization, and in speaking to a few members of the team, they explicitly said that the flexibility in benefits was more important for them than the benefits that we were potentially laying out at the time. And so we're in the process of rebuilding our benefits programs so that people, specifically millennials who are in the organization, can choose the benefits. Not everyone necessarily wants a gym membership. They may prioritize other elements of it as well. But I think for us, transparency is incredibly important when it comes to the millennial generation. And if you've read our co-founder's book, The Alliance, Reid Hoffman, he talks about a new type of work contract that employees have with employers. Yes, you still have the traditional work contract that you sign just before you join an organization, but there's this new level of transparency, this verbal agreement, which is that a millennial is willing to come and join an organization potentially for a set period of time. And as long as you know up front that individual is coming to do a role, maybe they're set on doing the job for 3 years, you can work with them to develop their skills to both be brilliant at the job that they're doing today, as well as the job that they may want to do in the future, recognizing that that job may be at the current company or somewhere else. And you have to be willing to have that level of transparency. Admittedly, not everyone is comfortable doing that at this stage, but I think increasingly that's becoming the norm. We have conversations with individuals at LinkedIn whereby we say to them, how long have you been in your role? How are you feeling about your role today? What are the skills that you've acquired? And importantly, what are you thinking about doing next? And do you see that next play in LinkedIn or externally? And if it's externally, we can then help facilitate introductions through the network that we've created at LinkedIn, help prepare them for the interview skills that they need to obtain the jobs in those companies. But that's a very non-traditional way of working. And I think that's by the fact that 70% of them say that they're going to leave their roles in the next 5 years.
But Josh, what do you think? How important is social responsibility for an organisation, for a millennial?
Absolutely critical. It is one of the key questions that we are asked on every single interview. What's the mission of the company? What's the vision of the company? How are you providing value back to society? They're asking to learn more about our corporate social responsibility initiatives. We have a program called LinkedIn for Good that many of them have already researched before they come in for the interview process. And going back to Kathy's first point, it's human nature to search for patterns and to generalize, but it is remiss of us to generalize across a whole generation born over a 25 year period. And there's a lot of mixed signals in the media. And if you look at some of the comments that are leveled at millennials, it's that they're lazy, entitled and impatient. They were 3 of the words that I looked at this morning in the press. And in reality, they tend to value meaning over money. They're acutely socially aware. And specifically in the UK, I would say they have shunned that traditional British reserve and are also avid networkers.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Well, if you have any questions you'd like to put to the panel, please contact us on @hire on LinkedIn, handle with the hashtag L1Millennials. Okay, Jürgen, you have a marketing and kind of background. If I'm an employer, what could I do that kind of enables me to develop an employer brand that attracts this particular community that we all clearly believe is so important?
Right, so as an employer, you will want to showcase your culture. Well, in the first place, you want to have the right culture that attracts millennials. But basically, millennials will be researching you like mad. They will be checking you out on every social network, Glassdoor and other sites before they make decisions, even before they apply. They will be looking at other employees. LinkedIn is a fantastic tool for that, Twitter and other places too. If you want to try to attract them in a different way, I think you probably want to look beyond normal job postings as well. Perhaps setting a challenge, do something interesting, a bit of a competition, a game, something. For instance, at my business, we have done traditional interviews, but as a second interview step, we've done, okay, so now you have to go away and do a 6-second Vine video to convince us that you are the candidate for the job.
6 seconds.
Yeah,
You're going to get a lot of information in that.
Well, it's tough, but one girl that currently works with us, she did a fantastic job at it. What
did she do? She just went on and said, "I'm in."
Well, basically, she showcased a few different ways of how, she was there with boxing gloves. She said, "I can speak up for myself. I'm really good at writing." She was pretending to type something, and then she said something about, and I also stay abreast of internet trends. And then 1 second later, she got an ice bucket thrown over herself. So I thought all that in 6 seconds, that made me laugh out loud, and that's, she got hired.
And for those reasons, I'm in.
Yes, she got in. Sure.
Okay, Andy, tell me, from your point of view, as obviously quite a substantial employer, what do you think are the different priorities that millennials have to the older generation?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's interesting from this debate is that a lot of millennials listening will be saying actually it's quite hard to get a job as well. And so often I think this is why they make a compromise joining an organisation, why they might want to move on quickly. So having to compromise in their first career move. I think the difference is that we need to think about. I think the fact that they are well networked and they research pieces on your organisation, the digital nature that they've grown up in that space, the disconnect often between entry level and moving into the organisation and leadership is something that we have to be very, very, very aware of. So I think this is the big difference that we start to see. And so actually we even think about reverse mentoring and actually training everyone in digital in our organisation. Our CEO, we're very lucky, he's incredibly sociable in terms of, he's a social sort of FTSE CEO. And so we've done a lot of work to try and engage that connection between those people in the organisation who are leading the organisation who are not millennials and that. So there's a fundamental difference in the way they communicate with one another. They expect more information. And if they're not, they'll go and find their own information anyway and make their own decisions. And so engagement is, I think, one of the biggest things that we have to focus on.
No, and I couldn't agree with you more. Kathy, one of the questions we've got in is this community that we're all talking about, that we're saying actually doesn't stay in jobs for too long. My question to you is, A, should we come up with strategies that enables us to keep them for longer? Question A. Question B, or should we just let them go?
Going back to Josh's point earlier, I think the approach that we take as a relatively small company in terms of employee numbers, with just over 200 globally, around 125 in the UK, we know that we won't necessarily always have that next step up for everybody within the business, but we do have those very honest conversations around what is your next step longer term, what is your next step within the next 12 months, and how can we help you towards that goal. And I think by doing that, it actually means that you can retain people for slightly longer, because they are still giving something to you and your business, but also they know they are supported and learning in your organisation, even if still that longer term aspiration needs to be fulfilled elsewhere. So we had a conversation with somebody recently who works in our customer services team. Their aspiration is to work in our materials team. We had a very honest conversation that we don't think there's going to be a role in that department within the next 12 months, but what we could do was arrange for them to have time with our product director, to have conversations with people who are in our team out in Asia, and to spend some time learning and point them in the right direction of different resources. So although that won't retain that person necessarily long term, what it will do is give them a learning opportunity and know that we are willing to invest in them as an individual in the short term. So I think, yes, you need to try and retain people longer term, but also you have to be honest. There's no point trying to...
You're not going to keep them all.
You can't keep everybody, and you shouldn't try and keep everybody, and they will figure out that actually what are the opportunities, how realistic is that, and also they will give that discretional effort back to you and your business if they know that you care about them as an individual. So a lot of what we're able to do, because of the size of numbers that we have, is to get to know people and what their aspirations are, what's important, and in any initiative where they were looking at well-being, learning and development, doing end-of-year reviews, having conversations with people around what's really important to them, we can make that happen at an individual level without having to think. We're not thinking about thousands of people. When you've got 200 people, you can do it.
Okay. One of the bits of information I came across, Paul, from LinkedIn, which I found quite interesting, was a lot of millennials are leaving large corporates and now tending to join smaller organisations. I suppose as president of the CBI, that's a big challenge for big corporates, because the success of any organisation today is the quality and calibre of its people, and the innovative thinking of some of these young people is an important ingredient to have in an organisation. So if I'm a large corporate today and I'm seeing that some of this talent is going out the door, what advice could you give to some of these large corporates to enable them to retain that talent?
Well, I think a couple of things. I mean, I think whatever size business you run, and the CBI covers 190,000 different businesses from small to medium to large, whatever size business you have, attracting, recruiting, retaining quality people is absolutely vital. I think the changes we're talking about mean that if you are a very big business, the real challenge is, how do we change our culture, our behavior and our leadership so that we can be better at motivating, retaining people than we had before? I think it's just getting tougher. So the biggest challenge on the agenda for corporations right across the world is a challenge of leadership. How do you create the vision, the values, the behavior, the culture that will be attractive to our customers, to our employees and to other stakeholders? And I just think the bigger your company, the more of the challenge that is to execute it in 140 countries around the world, each of which has difference. I think the point made earlier, not all millennials are the same. When you globalize that, there's a lot of difference to deal with. I mean, I think the bottom line is that the challenge for each and every one of us is, as leaders, to adapt to these sort of challenges and changes, and make our place of work, our company, the most exciting company on planet Earth. And you raised something earlier, which I think is an opportunity in front of each and every company, and that is, how do you have a CSR policy, a social program that makes your company special because you're making a difference to your customers, to your local community. And if you're really good at that, all the evidence says employee engagement, pride in company correlates directly with the social impact of your firm.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. Jürgen, one for you. Tell me, what type of digital platform or media platform should organisations be looking at today in order to attract this highly talented community?
Well, I'm looking Josh in the eye now, and I have to say LinkedIn.
Don't make it so obvious.
So I think if you want to reach the younger demographic, I don't know how young you want to start attracting.
Well, I consider myself very young.
Yeah, of course.
Ignoring the beard.
And I have seen you on LinkedIn a few times. So for the younger demographic, we're looking at channels such as Snapchat. We're looking at, well, obviously Facebook. But so more those type of image.
Give an example
platform.
how we would use Snapchat to attract somebody.
Yeah, so Snapchat will be, it's throwaway messages, so messages that self-destruct within 24 hours, allowing corporations and organizations to make content that doesn't have to sit around and be indexed in Google forever, so it doesn't have to be perfect. So for instance, I just did a Snapchat video right now, just before we started this conversation, and that's going to stay up for 24 hours, and it wasn't perfect, but it's consumable. People like it or they don't like it, and then you put out another piece of content tomorrow. And that's how the millennials want to interact. They don't necessarily want to be have their images on Google and places. I think they're more concerned about privacy than our generation is. So those type of platforms where you interact more on a one-to-one basis, it's not a massive feed. You choose who you want to subscribe to, and also it's all about the messaging. So what this video I did here is not going to necessarily attract millennials, but if you do content that's aimed at millennials, talking about culture, talking about what a day in the life of a graduate at LinkedIn, what's it like, that's going to attract millennials.
Okay, got a good question here for you, Kathy. Mm-hmm. Larry wants to know that as the fact that time to hire is getting longer for junior and middle management, what are you doing as an organisation that's bridging that gap, and why do you think it's taking longer?
Yeah, I think the time to hire for that group is not just because they're millennials, it's also they're millennials and they tend to be in either digital or sales or niche areas as well. So it's never as simple as it's because people are millennials, and as you said, there are times when people within that age bracket find it hard to get a job, but likewise there are people that have very saleable and in-demand skill sets that they have a lot of choices to where they can go and work. So I think in some areas that's a factor, and so it's then showing that you are attractive, that you have the right employer brand, and we're not completely where we want to be with that yet. That's a big project for us across the next 12 months, 2 years, making sure that everything that we present externally really advertises us in a very honest way, because I think that's also important. It's the honesty. I think that most job applicants these days can see through glossy brochures, very slick videos, information that is put out there directly to attract them. Same with CSR policies. If people think it's lip service and it's not real, then it doesn't work. And some of the feedback that we get, which is really positive, is that how we've described our organisation at interview, or how we presented that in LinkedIn in terms of showing our people in action, having fun, doing great things, is actually then the experience that they have when they come into the business. And the same with our values, knowing and feeling it, that it isn't just something which we do because we think we should, and it's not a tick box exercise. That really helps to give our candidates, whether they're millennial or not, the confidence to come and work in our business.
You know, one of the lessons I learned, Kathy, when I started this business 30 years ago, and we were recruiting for organizations, it was very corporate, it was very professional, it was all about strategy, etc. Today, it's really interesting that organizations are more fun to work with.
Yeah.
You know, and I think those small, soft issues today are just as important and just as valuable as some of the kind of hard, you know, this is the career structure, this is your progression, and this is your salary. You know, I spend a lot of time when I interview people actually talking about the fact that as the founder of the business, to me, one of the most important things about somebody working for my organization is I want them to have fun. Because if we actually put it into context, you know, people sometimes are in the office from 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening. They spend a lot more time at work than they do at home. And if work isn't fun, if it's not enjoyable, if we don't do things that engage those people, that is to me one of the factors or ingredients of retention.
Yeah.
And in our organization, I absolutely encourage people that we should be doing stuff that's fun, whether it's sports or whether it's a quiz or whether it's a pizza on a Friday, whether it's having a football team, all of those things. And in our particular organization, we go out of our way to incorporate, because we believe that that ingredient in today's modern world is becoming as important as I went 30 years ago. I'd be sitting there with a career chart and say, you know, when you've done this, you become a manager and you become a director. You know, all of that. I'm not saying it's not important, but actually I think this new generation, and I remember, you know, going to Google recently and I was sitting in reception and there was a hammock in reception. There was a guy on a laptop, you know, swinging on a hammock. I mean, it's just wacky, but there was a message in there, wasn't there? You know, literally sitting in reception, that actually it's okay to have fun. So I do genuinely believe that as employers today, in order to embrace this community, we need to think a bit outside the box, because if you're still a little bit set in your old-fashioned ways, I'm just not sure you're going to retain them, because there are organizations out there that are embracing this new kind of breed of individual, and some of these young people are transforming organizations. So I think as employers out there, this is such an important part of our future strategy for growth. And if we want to be competitive, you know, you can't ignore this community, absolutely. Anything you want to add to that, Josh?
So I agree with everything you said, and I think there are certain elements that haven't changed over the years. I think having fun is always incredibly important. In your book, you talk about how you used to recognise
You say you read my book?
I've read your book, James. Indeed. You talked about how you recognised the employees and surprised them when they weren't necessarily expecting it. But I think ensuring for millennials today that you're listening, that they're actively being heard, that you're sort of closing that loop and giving them feedback about how their ideas are potentially changing the business. At LinkedIn specifically, again, within the digital world, it's a highly competitive landscape. And therefore, to some degree, people have expectations. We come into work, we provide people with breakfast, we provide them with lunch, we provide them with a day, what we refer to as in-day, once a month, where people can work on a project outside of their day-to-day. And these are all elements which, as you say, mean people look forward to coming into work in the morning. And we say in the office, definition of happiness is looking forward to going into work in the morning and looking forward to going home at night. And you need to find that sort of balance between the two and ensure that it's a fun environment that challenges them, where they can be heard and where they can provide value back to society. And just touching very briefly on a comment that you made before, I think it's incredibly important from an employer brand perspective to ensure that your corporate, your consumer and your employer brand are consistent. I think increasingly, especially with access, 24/7 access to information, there's no point in talking about culture and values in one of those pillars and ignoring them in the other. People are going to read your prospectus. They're going to read what you're writing on your talent, on your recruitment site. There has to be consistency in the message across the entire organization. You can't say one thing to one person and one thing to someone else, because you will very quickly be found out.
I mean, one of the things that I wanted to maybe share was, and I don't think this applies to every organisation, because I think a lot of large corporate organisations are structured in a way where probably this is not possible, but there are a lot of companies around the world that I'm now seeing that are setting up sort of a venture arm. So you've got Google Ventures, Intel Ventures, And this is something I actually did nearly 30 years ago, where I recognized that ultimately it is people who transform organizations. And when I set up in business, the culture of the UK was, if you came up with a great idea, the first thing you had to do was go and leave and take it somewhere else. Because the idea of going to your boss or your CEO and say, I've got this great idea, it's just not something as a nation we encourage, because it was almost like you're not doing your job. And I've seen a lot of success in my career where I've actually had a number of people who approach me and say, James, I've got an idea that we as an organization should be doing it this way. And one of the businesses that I experienced, we set up a business called Alexander Mann, which is today one of the largest human resources companies in the world. And the lady who in fact runs that business actually approached me 20 odd years ago with that idea and said, I know Alexander Mann does transactional recruitment, but I think the market is going to evolve into outsourcing. And it was something we didn't do. It was something, frankly, we didn't understand. But she had this idea that she felt the market was going to go in a particular way. And we backed her with that kind of vision, with that idea. And we created an organization called Alexander Mann Solutions, which was a new division which she headed. And today that business is a global business that employs literally thousands of people, and it's probably going to generate over $1 billion in fees. The moral of the story, imagine if I hadn't have listened, imagine if I hadn't have done that, that business today would have been my biggest competitor. So I think there's a message in there that I think organizations should encourage, inspire and motivate people to say, if you come across a way where you think we could do it differently, do it better, then don't be afraid to approach us. Because the problem is, if you don't encourage that, by default, what you're saying is take it somewhere else. And you may find yourself in a position where you've invested, educated, developed and trained somebody who then takes that nugget somewhere else. So I think whatever you can do, one of the things, I have another business that I've launched recently called Recruitment Entrepreneur. The business in my 30-year career, today I have a portfolio of over 30 different businesses that I have a stake in. This business is one of the fastest growing businesses I have. And again, it was an individual who works in my organization and said to me, James, I've got this crazy idea, you're going to love this. And it was an idea that effectively what we do as an organization, our job is to go out to the market to find the most talented recruitment professionals that you can find to build businesses. And over the last kind of 5 or 6 years, we'd back 2 or 3 of them. And she said, why don't we do more? I said, the truth is because we can't find that kind of volume of such talented people. And she said, well, I have an idea. I was watching X Factor yesterday. And she said, why don't we run a competition on X Factor to say James Caan's looking for the next recruitment entrepreneur? It was such a wacky idea. And I said, how does that work? She said, well, just imagine if we crafted this kind of marketing advert very much with your face on it. People know that you invest in people. They know you invest in individuals. And you're looking for that next top individual that we can back. I thought, you know what, it sounds so crazy, let's do it. So we ran the campaign, and here's me saying 2 weeks ago, we can't find those people. We had over 400 applications of some of the smartest people I've ever come across who wanted to set up their own business and who would be looking for an investment from me, which is kind of what I do anyway. And our biggest challenge now wasn't finding people, is how do you get to meet 400 people? So we had to go through a whole screening exercise. We eventually got it down to a short list of 3. And there was a panel of 8 of us analysing which one of the 3 we're going to back. And none of us could agree. So we ended up backing all 3 of them. Mm-hmm. Today, that is, from an idea, has now turned out to be a business. That business today backs a new business every 6 weeks. So we actually start a new recruitment business every 6 weeks. We set it up 18 months ago. It employs over 120 people. So it's growing literally at kind of 10 people every month. But the moral of the story is we have an organization where the culture is, if you have this crazy idea, it's okay to come to us. Don't take it somewhere else, because we want to embrace. And I think that's how you capture the kind of creativity and the imagination of some of the talent you have. And I believe today, every organization in this country has somebody like that. The question is, how are you allowing them to come forward? And when I look at bigger companies like Google, they're saying, you know what, we'll set up Google Ventures. So if somebody's got a great idea, rather than taking it somewhere else, let us back it. You know, and bearing in mind, they were one of the backers of Uber. You know, today, I mean, that's probably made 20 times the investment. So I think there's something to be said for organizations to think outside the box, to go beyond the norm, because I do believe we're dealing with a different generation. You know, it's not the same as when I started. It's a different environment. The platform's different, communication's different, technology's different. I mean, I suppose from your perspective, from a CBI point of view, what is it that you think, because America right now clearly leads the way in this field, what could we learn from across the pond?
Well, you know, I think that I was just sort of reflecting on what you were saying, and a couple of thoughts that come to mind. I think the first is, I mean, I think the current generation is very different. Their appetite and determination to do something by themselves is significantly higher. Their willingness to give up a job without having another job is 100 times higher than it was 50 years ago. But also, I think, you know, if we've seen something in the UK in the past 5 years, which you'll know better than me, I mean, the number of startups in digital technology in
Phenomenal.
the UK, in Shoreditch or in Cambridge, I mean, you know, I think we are learning from the US. I mean, we've got lots of people from the US here and vice versa. So I think, I mean, I think this is all happening. I guess what I'm really reflecting on is that, you know, the danger is we talk as though the people who will determine the future are the people who are running today's company. I think the great companies today are handing power over to the next generation. Now, look at some of our bigger members, PwC, KPMG, for example. They have armies of young people who are collaborating together on changing the way the company is. So they're handing real opportunity to people inside the company to change it. And that's what I think, you know, my advice to any big company would be, do not try and manage this generation, empower them to change the company the way it will work for them.
Andy, would you say Sage is an entrepreneurial environment?
I think we're going through a huge transformation. I think we have been probably behind the curve on that. And typically we're getting back to our roots now. I think, you know, our new CEO coming into the business, we've transformed the way we're thinking about work. And I think that we're now starting to listen to our people a little bit more. The engagement piece, I think Peter made earlier, is really, really important. So if we get, it's about contribution for people as well. So it's not necessarily about having the idea, but how do I contribute to this? How do I contribute to the whole piece? So pulling this together. So in terms of entrepreneurs, we let people come up with their own ideas, it's true. But obviously there's a structure around our products that we're having to launch to the market. So it's more about getting us closer to the customer and bringing that back in. Now, what I think is really interesting about our organisation is that we support a lot of entrepreneurs in what we do. We want to be the champions of small business. So we're okay with the fact that people come in, and if they leave and be entrepreneurs, for us that's a great thing. So we encourage that. We encourage that spirit and that pushback. And we want to get feedback and get real honest feedback in our culture. We've probably not been really honest with ourselves about our own performance in the past, and also about our opportunity. So opening that up is really important. The whole infrastructure in terms of what we're trying to be now, you know, we have reverse mentoring. Some of our senior leaders now are becoming incredibly digital because we let people lower in the organisation who are much more savvy in this area help us do that. And so our social presence in the last 12-18 months has been huge, and that's because the ideas come from beneath. So it's not just about the new product, it's about the way we talk to customers, it's the way we talk about ourselves. I have a vision of 13 to 14,000 recruiters in my company, and having the whole community out there, and I've said this before with LinkedIn, it's a big ambition of mine to have that connected workforce internally. We even get on, you know, on day one in induction, we're just digitizing all of that now, but we actually encourage people to sign up into LinkedIn and then encourage their network, because we think all the solutions lie within your network and within those things. So it maybe not be entrepreneurial, come up with a great idea that's going to, you know, tip the balance for the company. It's maybe not as raw as that, James, but it's more subtle across the organisation, allowing people to do that. and embracing the things that people care about. Like we've set up our Sage Foundation. That's new for us, about giving people the opportunity to contribute to communities themselves, taking time paid to do that, looking at how we socialise our brand and make connections with our local communities as well as the broader piece. So I think it's about contribution, which I think breeds entrepreneurship in a very innovative way. So maybe it's more about innovation than maybe
entrepreneurship.
Maybe that's the word. Maybe that's the word. But I think it's pulling all of these things together to create a brand, a community within your organisation that connects with your customers and the future, as opposed to maybe looking at the way we've always done things.
And you used a term that I didn't quite understand. What do you mean by socialising the brand?
Well, I think, our brand very much is, you have corporate brand. And I don't think you should have a corporate brand. I think it should be a social brand because it makes connections. And often business to business, you find have a corporate brand and then you have a very different brand, an employer brand. I think they're one and the same. So our brand needs to be socialised out there to everybody. Understand what we do, be part of it, connect with our people, see what our people do day to day. So we're putting a lot of things together, and we've got a hell of a lot of work to do to pull this together, in terms of making all these connections, all these pieces to tie into one story. And it's very tricky. And so, building our employer brand is a huge piece, but I think it's one and the same, to Josh's point earlier.
Sure. Josh, you're the new entrant on the block. So as LinkedIn, I suppose you're the kind of new emergence of businesses. If we've got employers out there listening today, what are the 3 things that you could share with an employer today that will give them that ability to differentiate themselves in this market to attract that millennial?
Absolutely. So I think the beauty of, to some degree, we may be a new entrant, although LinkedIn first established itself in 2003, but globally we're up to about 400 million members today.
I thought you'd just get that in quick.
I absolutely. I thought that in many respects, platforms such as LinkedIn and others in the market are democratizing access to talent. And it's no longer, we talked about people shunning large enterprise for small businesses, and now small businesses have a real opportunity to attract the best talent in the business today. And what are some of the ways that they can do that? They can build a rich employer brand. They can ensure that their materials, their marketing collateral talks about their culture, talks about their values. They can showcase how employees in their organizations are progressing through the skills that they're acquiring. They can ensure that they have a robust presence on all social platforms, which doesn't just talk about their employer brand, but their corporate and consumer as one. They can ensure that their employees have a robust profile on LinkedIn. Their employees can be in many respects, their greatest and most vocal brand advocates. And would I rather have an employee in my organization shouting from the rooftops about LinkedIn rather than sort of potentially an advert? Absolutely. I think the power of that is incredibly, incredibly strong. So I would say ensure that you have your employees on the platform, that they have robust profiles, that they're showcasing their skills, they're talking about the benefits and why they enjoy working at the organization. Build yourself a strong employer brand. Train up your teams to be able to use these new technologies to search for the best talent. It's no longer a situation where people are just applying for jobs. 70% of the broader community are passive. And if you can go after passive candidates who may be thoroughly enjoying the role that they're doing today and be brilliantly successful about it and put in front of them a brand new opportunity, that is incredibly compelling for them. And what better thing to do than bring in the people who are brilliant at their jobs today versus just those who are looking for a new role.
Very good insights, Josh.
Great point.
Very
just
good.
a quick thought on that, James, I could. Teach First is an organisation that places teachers into the most disadvantaged schools. 25% of the people who go into teaching through Teach First each year are career changers. So they're not just changing their job, they're basically going from a career in business to teach in a classroom. And the attraction is about the opportunity to lead young people towards better lives. So the way we can attract people, I think, is really strongly through creating a sense of possibility that you can, as an individual, change the lives of other people significantly. And all of us at our companies can do that in different ways.
Yeah, no, I could see that. Jürgen, I've had a great question from you. how will recruitment change as millennials become the people actually doing the hiring? That's turning it upside down.
So how do they mean? The people...
So what they're saying is, years to come, we'll now have millennials on the other side of the table now doing that.
Oh, right, yes.
What impact do you think that will have?
Right, I think, well, I hope that...
I'm asking you as the undercover recruiter.
Yes, with all the
What does
answers.
that mean, by the way?
Well, it means when I started the blog back in 2009, nobody knew who I was, and I didn't put my name on it. So I was truly undercover until I left that company, and then I came
And here you are
above
now
cover.
on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
talking to 400 million people.
That's it.
I think
yeah.
your cover's blown.
Yes, that happened some time ago. But I think when they are recruiting, and I think they already are, I'd say, I think possibly it'll be more about the purpose bit again, and what questions will they be asking? So they'll be saying, what's important to you? Perhaps looking at not just this job, but what's important to you in life. What's your 2-year plan? What's your 5-year plan? How can this organization fit into your life plan? We know it's a job, but we want to look at the whole picture here, and also just looking at what are some of the challenges and what's some of the problems that applicants want to solve, as opposed to I want to be an accountant or I want to be a sales guy. No, I actually want to help people do this and that. I want to help build companies. I want to enable people to use technology. Looking at it that way, so people want to solve problems and giving them jobs where they can.
Okay, Kathy, I think we've got a good question from you from Saida. Saida wants to know, how has it changed the recruitment process, and are there questions you ask now that you didn't before to this community?
We've recently changed the questions that we use in recruitment, but that's more because we did a whole piece of work in the last 12 months where we reevaluated our values and culture and had new values. So they weren't new because they were already in the business, but we went out to every single person in the organisation and asked them what they thought was important, and did an awful lot of consultation and engagement to come up with better, proud and appreciative. And that's worked really well because it wasn't just values that were dropped into the business from the top. Everybody had a view on it. And what that's meant, and probably linking in with the last question around when millennials are recruiting, is that our recruitment managers, who quite often are from the millennial generation, use a set of questions which don't just say, what do you think you want to make better? What are you proud of? But in a smarter way, test better, proud and appreciative. And so that helps us to look for people that are already aligned with our organisation. And then this year we're introducing talent champions as well. So people who are having a great experience in our business know exactly what type of person fits into our culture and our organisation and can talk very honestly and openly around what it's like to be in the business. They will also be part of the recruitment process to really help us to check that we are matching up with the aspirations of the individual, but also the requirements of the business. So I think maybe it's not so much that the questions have changed because of we're wanting to attract millennials, but it's about finding that match. It's a bit like dating, isn't it? Sometimes people come along just just to see what happens, and just because they want to be an accountant or want to be
they're just flirting
in IT.
with you.
Yeah, just flirting. We want to find the people that are in it for the long haul, for their serious relationships, and it's finding people who really have a passion for our organisation.
And they're the ones who want a deep, meaningful relationship.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, they're looking to settle down. At least even if it's for the short term, for the next couple of years. So I think it's about finding that and identifying it, but also providing enough information for those candidates to make a really informed decision, but doing it in a very honest way. So we always make sure we talk to our candidates about what's amazing, but also what are our challenges, what might they find a little bit difficult, what do they need to consider if they're moving from maybe a more corporate organisation where everything is done, set in stone. And then what will they find differently when they come into a more entrepreneurial, creative business that hasn't been going for as long. So it's about giving information and extracting from people during that process around what's really important to them.
Brilliant, thank you, Kathy. Well, we got 5 minutes before we wrap, so what I'd like to do, if I could just go round to the panel, if you can give me one tip that you would give to an employer today that either attracts, retains or develops a millennial, what tip would that be? I'm going to kick off with my undercover recruiter, Jürgen.
Right, okay, so I think my number one tip is a very practical tip. So, James, you talked about having fun within your organisation,
Absolutely.
which I think everyone should strive for. I would say it's about also capturing those moments and projecting those so that the wider world can see how much fun
That's a really
is
good
being
point.
had inside that organisation. And a really good way of doing that is obviously doing videos and images and so on social media, and to use what I would call a life hashtag. So examples of these will be hashtag life at SAP, Adobe Life, LinkedIn Life, it's even life at Link Humans. Basically, if you click on that
Yeah, really
hashtag,
interesting,
you
yeah.
see a whole stream of people having fun, doing charity races, bake-offs, and so on. And so it's a one click to get company culture in your stream, and that could sway a candidate.
Great, fantastic. Josh?
Two things. One is build a strong employer brand that is consistent across corporate, consumer, and employer. And secondly is get very comfortable having discussions about having transparent discussions with your employee base. Get comfortable asking the questions which traditionally 20 years ago you may not have asked. How happy are you at work? What are you thinking about your next role? What are the skills that you're missing before you move on to your next role? I'm a great believer that transparency will open the doors to enabling companies around the globe to retain talent for longer.
Excellent. Paul, your top tip?
Well, I'm going to sort of build on this idea of transparency. Be transparent around why you're proud about your business and about how your business is having a positive contribution on the world around you.
Excellent. Andy?
I think take time to really understand this generation. Talk to them, understand what they do, and then make sure that you open up your organisation into your own community out there, so that they can really see and touch and feel that organisation, and create advocates. Create the fantastic experience in your own organisation, and share it out there. And trust me, there's probably a lot of great things your company does that these generations I don't think are completely different. They still have some very strong core values.
Shout from the rooftops.
I think so.
I couldn't agree with you more. Kathy?
My tip would be to listen, because I think there's always something a bit dangerous around a group of people who aren't millennials. If you have a group in your business sitting around discussing what's going to be fun or what those people would like, there's the like this group here, and there's the risk of verging into being a bit cringy and launching something that isn't going to be well received. If you have your target audience in your business already, they will tell you what they would like and what's going to work and what actually is fun, and then you're going to do the right thing. Don't rely on guesswork and assumptions.
Okay, so I'm going to add my one key tip. So one of the things that I do that works really well for us as an organisation is before somebody joins the company, we always encourage them to spend a day in the organisation. And the reason why I do that is I recognise that when it doesn't work out, the cost and the inconvenience and the hassle is actually a bit of a nightmare. So to me, if it's not going to work, I want to know really quickly. And the quickest way you can get to that position is allow somebody to spend a day in your organisation, identify 4 or 5 different individuals in the organisation that they kind of either mentor or work with, etc., and get them to absorb the culture and the atmosphere. And in a funny sort of way, I'm not at that point saying, this is why I think you should join. I'm almost saying this is why you shouldn't join. Because if you're not going to do it, I'd like to know now, because 6 weeks from now or 3 months from now, the actual downside is 1,000 times worse. So my kind of closing tip on that would be, if you are in a position and you can do so, having the opportunity of spending a day in the organisation, I think, is invaluable. Well, thank you very much for all of our excellent guests for today's special LinkedIn webcast, marking 20 million UK members for the professional network. Don't forget to check out the recording, which will be shared shortly via the LinkedIn Talent Solutions blog at talent.linkedin.com/blog. Thank you to Josh, Paul, Kathy, Andy, Jürgen, and my name is James Kahn, and thank you for listening this afternoon.